Hi, we're excited to have. My name is George Rada. I'm the Senior Technology Advisor at Lab CFTC, and we're excited to have Stephen Ryan, the founder and COO of CipherTrace, here with us, and he's going to tell us a little bit about their tracing technology. He has over 25 years' experience in the security and payments market. Steve is a fintech and securities executive and serial entrepreneur, and has experience with a variety of internet-based security initiatives, as well as experience with productizing government-funded initiatives. Additionally, Steve has been an early-stage advisor to some very successful companies that some of you will know, like PayPal and Splunk. As a seasoned entrepreneur, Steve helped build and bring to market some mobile security company, Marble, which is now part of Proofpoint. Prior to Marble, Steve was an executive vice president of online resources and was responsible for digital and payment operations. Steve was a co-founder of IronKey, which productized Department of Homeland Security's science and technology research, and ultimately sold over 2 million IronKey devices, which are secure thumbnail flash drives. So let me go ahead and turn it over to Steve. Steve, we're glad to have you here, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Hey, thanks, George. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So I'm looking for our presentation. Do you see that yet?
I do not. I think it should be coming up. Ivy?
Okay. They did tell us there might be a little bit of a delay. Oh, looks like something's coming in. There we go.
There you are. Okay, great. All right, take it away, Steve.
There you go. Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Steve Ryan. As George mentioned, I'm one of the founders of CipherTrace. My background is kind of digital banking and payments, as George went through. So I've got a lot of experience with traditional banking, traditional payments, and in 2015 we founded CipherTrace. So today I'm going to talk to you about cryptocurrency risks and some of the observations that we are seeing in this new cryptocurrency ecosystem. Let me just sort of keep going here. Here we go. So the topics, George and I sort of talked about what would be interesting for sort of this group. And so this is sort of the agenda topics we covered. Vast geographic risk. I'm going to go into some of that in terms of looking at geography, region of the world, where's some of the highest risk places that has cryptocurrency. We're also going to talk about DeFi and the AML and KYC risks that it brings to the table. And we're going to talk about 51% attacks as well, another topic. Many of you probably saw about the Ethereum Classic attack back in August. We'll talk about that. We'll actually put some numbers to that too. We'll show you, what was the financial impact of that. And Monero, CipherTrace just announced, everybody's always said Monero is impossible to trace. Well, I can tell you here today, it's not as easy as Bitcoin, but it's traceable to at least a certain percentage. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what we're doing at CipherTrace to kind of do that today. There's much more work to be done. But we've clearly got call it that first giant step in the right direction. So we'll also talk about travel rule. And this is the initiative that Fatif has been rolling out for about a year or so. We'll talk about, FinCEN is adopting this, looking to make some changes about the value of transactions, what should be covered by travel rule, and so forth. And then lastly, we're going to end on some CipherTrace success stories and kind of really the idea behind that is sort of the art of what's possible today, right? Because a lot of people just don't understand, well, what can you really do? What type of analytics can you run? What type of tracing can you do? So that's kind of the main 6 topics we're going to cover, and we will, let me just jump right into that. So first of all, if you look at VASP, and the definition of VASP is a virtual asset service provider. Think of these as cryptocurrency exchanges. You've probably heard about Coinbase and Kraken and Gemini. Those are VASP. But also within that VASP definition are what's now known as DeFis and decentralized finance, as well as cryptocurrency ATMs. So just keep in mind that VASP is a broad category of entities in this cryptocurrency ecosystem, but it's mostly, you think about exchanges. And what we recently did, and there's a report on our website where we tracked all of the KYC programs of most all the VASPs in the world, and we identified them by country, by region. And the purpose of that was to find out where's the risky ones, right? And it was interesting, and we give these VASPs a KYC score. This is a Know Your Customer score, so this is what they do to onboard their customers. We give them a red, green, or yellow, and we'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide. But what's interesting is 56% of all the VASPs in the world have weak or porous KYC programs. And I've got a definition of that on the next slide, so we'll talk about what weak and porous is. But what's interesting is if you actually layer in and limit it to the exchanges that are dealing with privacy coins, things like Monero, things like Dash and Zcash, the number jumps up. So there's clearly a direct correlation between weak and porous KYC on VASP and those that also support privacy coins. We'll keep going here. This is really important information, as one of the things we'll talk about later is banks need to look at cryptocurrency exposure in their legacy payment systems. And when we help them do that, a big part of that is what's the risk of the counterparty? Because a lot of crypto is good today, but some is risky. And how do you determine who's risky or not? KYC is one of those levers, right? What do they do to onboard their customers? How much do they know about it? So next slide. So this is actually, again, a breakdown. You'll see this. It's a free report on our website. You can go to CipherTrace.com. But you can see here on the left-hand side, this is sort of the average KYC by country, and this is for fiscal year 2020. What's interesting, what we thought was interesting when we sort of did this was the three top areas in the world that have risky VASP are the United States, the UK, and Russia. And you go, wow, you wouldn't think the U.S. would be sort of grouped in with especially Russia, but they are. And again, we give every one of these VASPs a KYC score of green, yellow, or red. So green is bank level KYC. So that's similar to what you do if you go to get a brand new bank account at a bank in the U.S. They ask for a government ID and they validate you. So we give VASPs kind of a green that give that. Yellow is what we call porous, and this is where they'll have a KYC program, but generally it kicks in at a threshold, let's say $10,000 US. So you can transact with only an email address up until about 10,000 as an example. If you want to go beyond 10,000, you require a government ID. We call this yellow or porous because we see a lot of structuring and layering, the typical threats that you see in fiat. They apply those same techniques in cryptocurrency, and they'll just stay under these program metrics. And then red this is no KYC. This is the Wild West. All you need is an email address. It could be Gmail. It could be Hotmail. They don't really know who you are, and they don't really care what you do. If you look at the slide over here on the right, at least half of all the regions in the world have weak or porous KYC. And you'll see the difference between red and yellow there. So generally the red is higher, with the exception of APAC. It's about 50-50 between red and yellow. But we throw yellow in there as risky because, again, it's usually driven off of that threshold, right? And if they stay underneath that threshold, they might as well be red. So that's really the point of that. So, again, the U.S., UK, and Russia host the most risky VAPs that we see today. And keep in mind, in this category, it's not just exchanges. It's also Bitcoin ATMs, and it's also DeFis. And we'll talk more about that in this presentation. So you can imagine we've got a lot of Bitcoin ATMs in the United States. We've got a lot of DeFis that are headquartered here, and that's skewing some of our numbers. Our cryptocurrency exchanges are actually pretty good, but when you add in DeFis and Bitcoin ATMs, it tends to skew it towards this higher percent. we'll keep going here. And what do we do at CipherTrace? So when we're helping regulators and banks, we have a product called Armada that you can look at any one of these VASs. This is basically the detail that went into our report, and you can look by exchange, by entity, and you can look at their KYC scores. You can look at their cryptocurrency transaction risk scores. So this is the percent of their activity that we consider to be illicit or criminal in nature. And this is based on them interacting directly with criminals, either on receiving funds or sending funds. So this is our Armada product. And again, this is one of the things we help banks with today, understand their cryptocurrency exposures to these VASs. We give them the details behind this. They can then build this into their AML programs. We also work with regulators. Imagine if you're trying to license a VASP in your jurisdiction, you probably should have kind of an independent view of how they're really doing, and that's kind of what we help with. We'll keep going here. So DeFi, changing topics. This is our next topic. You'll see here I did a little play on words. So what does DeFi really stand for? We're calling this deficient AML. So I hope you guys take that with a little bit of fun. As you know, DeFi is a decentralized finance, decentralized, and what that really means is pretty much no KYC, no AML. It's the Wild West. We do see this as a bit of a bumpy ride. So we'll see how this goes. It feels a little bit like the ICO boom a few years back. We'll see how long this lasts, but there's clearly a lot of them right now. I suspect some won't last forever, and we'll end up with 3 or 4 that are survivors that probably do some good stuff in terms of regulatory compliance. But currently, these DeFi protocols, they really do lack regulatory compliance. Anyone in any country can access them with little to no KYC information. In the first 6 months of 2020, we saw about 45% of all cryptocurrency thefts were related to DeFi hacks. And that equated to about $51 million. And that was 40% of all hacked volume for that time. That's some of the information you see over here on the right side of the screen. In 2020, it's been about 47 million, so it's getting close to hitting what we saw last year. And then one of the things we're seeing too is we're using the term impermanent losses in DeFi. What does this mean? And we're telling people expect impermanent losses in DeFi. If you look at the math, basically what a lot of these things, they're lending programs, they're decentralized. You can put liquidity in, and then you'll get paid fees and basically funds back into you to basically the use of your crypto, right? So that's what a lot of these things are. There's a lot of lending programs and other types of things. So as we've started to analyze this, as well as other companies in the world, it's looking like these liquidity pools aren't very big. They're really not big enough to support the return on investment that they're giving the liquidity participants. So that's what we mean by expect impermanent losses in DeFi. We think a lot of these business models are not sound, and they'll eventually fall apart or implode at some point. So look for that more in the future. Reach out to us if you want to know more. But some of these business models are pretty sketchy. There's some pretty outrageous returns, and you just wonder, how can all this work? It sounds too good. We think some of it is too good. So we'll see how that goes in the future, but expect that. 51% attack scenario. So on to our next topic. So what is a 51% attack? George and I talked about this in advance. So there was one, and the next slide will actually show you some results of the Ethereum Classic, which CipherTrace was hired to do a lot of the analytics around that and to really figure out what happened. But this is really where a 51% attack is an attack on a blockchain by a group of miners, and that they basically control more than 50% of the network's mining and hash rate. They can take over the blockchain effectively. They can double spend on transactions, which is never ever good. And how do they do this? They do this by basically taking over the bulk of the mining power on a blockchain. And as you'll see on the slide over here on the right side, what does it cost to actually do a 51% attack? And you'll see sort of by coin what it costs. Bitcoin, and these are September numbers. They're not today's numbers. They'd be much, much higher. But in September, when we looked at this, it would cost you, if you really wanted to make a run on Bitcoin to do a 51% attack, about $500,000 an hour in processing costs. Not only that, it would require you to, you're not going to buy that. You're going to lease that from somebody like Hashrate or one of these other solution providers. You're going to be buying so much, you're really going to come under a lot of scrutiny and speculation. Why are you buying so much? So Bitcoin, we think, is probably not achievable. But as you sort of look down through this, look at Ethereum Classic here. What's it cost to sort of take over Ethereum on a 51% attack level? It's about $3,800 an hour. That's not a lot of money, especially, let me jump to the next slide. The Ethereum Classic, which was in August of 2020, was about a $4.6 million hack. $4.6 million. Keep in mind, it only cost them around $3,800 to get in the game, right? And you can see here, we actually did the breakdown of this. So on the Ethereum Classic, what exchanges took the major hits and who actually took those losses. So you can see here, Bitfinex had about $200,000 worth of loss that they had to cover in one way or another for their customers. Change Now, which is a swapping service, they were the heavy hitter here, about 2.2 million, mostly on the Bitcoin side. They actually, you can see they had both ETC and BTC exposure, but BTC was the big one, so Change Now had to absorb that. KuCoin at about 1.5 million and Binance at about 670,000. So pretty material amount. And so you can see here the buy-in for somebody to do a 51% attack was pretty low considering their outcome. So that's really kind of gives you the metrics on how a 51% attack can work, what it costs, and what the results can be. We'll keep going here. Next topic. So Monero, right? We wanted to talk about this a little bit. This is something that we did that's pretty unique. We announced it about 6 or 7 weeks ago, and it's always been said that Monero tracing is basically impossible. So it's absolutely hard. CipherTrace worked with a U.S. government agency to build out this capability for about 12 or 14 months. So this is some of the results of that work. We don't talk about this too publicly, so I'm going to stay a little light on this, guys. It's the last thing you'd ever want is how we do stuff to get out into the wrong hands of people, right? So, but what are we doing? So Monero is all about this concept of decoys, right? That's what ring signatures are all about. That's how this cryptography works. They build in all of these decoys. And so what we've been able to do through some very sophisticated algorithms is we remove these decoys. So we take the decoys out of the transaction flow that allows the tracing to focus in on where the real transactions are coming from and going. So that's really it in a nutshell. CipherTrace is able to successfully remove these decoys that enables it to be much easier to trace. I will caveat with there's still much more to do. There's still, it's still difficult, the next steps, and it's not as good as Bitcoin, right? And it may never get as good, but it's sure better than some of the people out there saying it's impossible. It's far from impossible, and we've made some great inroads. So if anybody ever wants to learn more about this, just let us know. Fatif travel rule. Next topic. So these are kind of the new guidelines for VASP to vast transactions. So what they're trying to do here, for nobody that kind of understands travel rule, is meant to talk about the data traveling. Not that, we're all going to get on an airplane or rent a car or something. This is all about data travel rule. Think of it as the equivalent of wire transfers. With wire transfers, you have originators' name and account numbers, and you have beneficiary names and account numbers. Fatif is meant to deploy that same set of requirements on the cryptocurrency world when it's a vast transactions. Keep in mind, if it's a good VAS, going to a good VAS, they should have KYC information, and they should have the ability to attach that, right? Because they'll know who the senders are and they'll know who the receivers are. So that's the general idea that Fatif's trying to accomplish with this travel rule. So when you hear about it, it's all about simulating what we do in the wire transfer world with crypto to crypto. Now, FinCEN recently came out with a proposed rule that the original standard was the threshold for this was going to be about $3,000. So you only had to be Fatif travel rule compliant if the transaction was $3,000 or more, $3,000 US. And this is FinCEN's definition is also it's where this transaction begins or ends outside the United States. It can be beginning or ending, doesn't matter. It's really vast to vast. So at a $300,000, we did some analytics on this. At a $3,000 sort of bar, we believe that's about 400,000 transactions that would have to be Fatif compliant. So FinCEN has then come out recently and said, hey, we think we may want to drop that to $250. Seems interesting, but what does that do to systems and infrastructure around it? That raises the number of transactions to over 1 million. So pretty significant, 3x growth curve on it by taking it from 3,000 to 250. This is still, I guess, in negotiation. It's out for public comment right now. We'll see where it lands. If I had to predict, I'd say it's probably going to end up at about 1,000. I think 3,000 is too high. I think there's 250s, too low. But I think probably somewhere around $1,000, that seems meaningful enough. We'll see where it goes. You'll see the logo here, Trissa. CipherTrace did put out a open source initiative called Trissa. This is a decentralized Fatif cryptocurrency travel rule compliance solution. It's used by about 80 exchanges around the world today, so you can go to trissa.io to find out more information. But that's one of the ways VAS can sort of adopt. There's other ways as well, but you can do that to become Fatif compliant and FinCEN compliant. Let's keep going. All right, now some of the cool stuff, other cool stuff. So we wanted to talk about sort of some CipherTrace success stories. At CipherTrace, we've analyzed over 90 ransomware attack variants around the world. Everything from Wannacry, which is really a nation state, that was the DPRK, the North Koreans, Russian gangs that targeted consumers. So there's a mix of these things. When you look at ransomware, some are consumer focused, some are enterprise focused. So let's talk about this. We've also partnered with Sophos and McAfee. We did a big research study with Sophos on a big consumer ransomware attack program earlier this year called Sextortion. You can Google Sophos CipherTrace and you'll find this. It's publicly available on their website. It's a really cool report to read. And then we did a similar thing with McAfee Enterprise. When you hear about hospitals being ransomed and other large organizations, oftentimes that's this ransomware called NetWalker. And we worked with McAfee on that. Again, you can Google McAfee CipherTrace and you'll find this. They're really cool reports to read. So the Lockheed ransomware, just a little bit on this. This was huge, right? This was eventually targeted to about 500,000 users. It was sent out via emails. Most of the funds moved to a site called btce.com. Our friends in law enforcement took that site down a few years ago. So most of that was gathered up, and a lot of information was found about it. But Lockheed ransomware was really targeted to these Cyprus/Russian websites at the time. Wannacry, this is the North Koreans, the Lazarus group. We did extensive analysis looking at where these funds went to, and where with Lockheed, mostly it went to btce.com. It was pretty spread out with Wannacry. Some of it went to local Bitcoin, some went to Shapeshift, Changely. A lot of these swapping services, you will see some of those. We've also done some great work on illegal drug sales. This was one we did up in Canada. There was an individual that was found selling illegal drugs on the dark web. We worked with the Canadian law enforcement agencies. It was the first seizure of cryptocurrency in Canada. It was 281 Bitcoins. It was a couple $1 million at the time. And we actually got certified as kind of the first and only today certified cryptocurrency forensics expert in the Canadian courts. Pretty cool stuff. This was all public in their newspapers, made big headlines. The Canadian government was pretty happy with the forensics that they were able to do here. And then this is kind of my last slide. So I thought this might be an interesting one. Some people know about Bitcoin ATMs, some people don't. Bitcoin ATMs, you tend to find these in convenience stores and vape shops, places that you may not want to go sometimes. They're usually in bad neighborhoods, at least at night. They tend to be in sketchy places. There's about 6,000 or 7,000 of these in the United States right now. If you look back a couple years ago, there was about 1,500. So it's seeing enormous growth. You can see here one of our charts, just like we do for VAS. We can do these on Bitcoin ATMs. You'll see the name Athena. You'll see that that's got a red KYC score. That means they don't care who you are. All you need is an email address or a burner phone number to work with their ATMs. But what's really interesting about Athena is they're Chicago-based. And if you look at over here on this right, this picture, the U.S. and South America, most of their ATMs are in the U.S., but they've got some in Mexico City, they've got some in Bogota, and they've got some in Argentina. So if you start to think about why would they have them in the United States and in Bogota, right? You can start to use your imagination on what type of customers they're servicing and what type of personas they have. Anyway,
right, so Steve, let me go ahead and jump in here, just because are you able to hear me?
Yep. I am, and that's my last slide, George. So
right, that's great. Steve, this has been a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate it, particularly because Steve and I had numerous multiple-hour-long conversations where we talked in great detail about what CipherTrace is doing, and I came to him with a list of, I don't know, about 6 or 7 major questions, and he's managed to answer all of my questions in these slides. So this has been fantastic. So thank you, Steve, for that. I do appreciate it. And so with that, though, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to our next panel. The next panel is the future of innovation, and Melissa Netram will be leading that. So Melissa is the head of Lab CFTC, our Chief Innovation Officer. So once again, Steve, thanks so much for your participation. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks again.